this was still around even after the Rose Quarter, event happened. And there were a few things. This started really changing a lot in the 1960s. So you kind of just kept seeing gradual, rapid change in every one of these neighborhoods. And so you can actually see this gazebo here. It has a really cool roof, right? That was actually the roof of one of the main predominant buildings within the Albina neighborhood. It was like their mall or something. And back in the 1960s, 1970s, they had what was called the Model Cities program. And so this is when they really started promoting the kind of development they were doing in the area. And Legacy Emmanuel Hospital, which is a hospital right around here, started massively expanding branches. And there were protests. There were protests going on because we have a Portland Development Commission, which is in charge of using what's called urban renewal. And I guess I have to talk about urban renewal now. Urban renewal is basically when a government is limited within its money because it gets its money through its income tax, it gets money through its property taxes. And if they want to generate more money, they do something called tax increment financing. And so what they do is they create an urban renewal area. And there's people who get appointed to be in charge of this urban renewal area. And what they do is they put a lot of more money, they borrow money off of the government, and then they use that money to create a lot of development in an area, and then the taxes that they earn from that increased value is used to pay off some of the debt. And the problem that we have right now is that for every dollar that we use in money to pay off our debt, we still have $19 left in debt. So it is not actually a sustainable program, but we continue doing it and building more and more urban renewal. So that's what happened here with the Model Cities program, where they decided to do urban renewal and then bring people all over the world to see what a great thing it did to get rid of this blighted neighborhood. And so there were huge protests for the hospital being built. And right down the street, I was talking about the Urban League of Portland, and it actually had a really tragic story. This was back when Avanci was mayor still, and the Avanci actually got the national chapter of the Urban League, which was in New York City, to come down here. And they were like, we have a bunch of black people in this neighborhood. We don't want them here anymore. So what do we have to do to get your people out of here? This is really what happened. And it infuriated the Urban League so much that they decided to establish a chapter here. So that's why we have the Urban League in the city of Portland. And we also have a really hip neighborhood over to the left called Mississippi, and also predominantly black. And just through that whole issue of urban renewal, where they basically gave a lot of money to certain people who could build a mall that they liked, an art gallery. Just if you weren't black, basically, we would give you money to build a business, and if you were black, we try to do whatever we could do to acquire your property and get rid of you. And it's kind of sad because now Mississippi looks much different than it used to be, and they created what you call a historic district, where basically they put a lot of regulations on that area to make sure you can't change anything about it anymore. So there was a lot of massive change that happened back in the day, and now they're trying to prevent anything else happening to it after it's been completely changed from what it used to be. So this is all we have to see of this area. I'm not going to take us all the way out to Alberta, because I feel that we're just going to keep looking at the same things. And Alberta, was in the 90s also gentrified. That's what the main word is used. They use gentrification when they talk about the massive displacement through the use of urban renewal. And people pretty much ask now, where do people live now? What happened with all this community that used to be here? And it's funny because a lot of people don't even realize that where they live now is still in the city of Portland. Most people live what is east of 82nd, and that's a few miles away there. And east of 82nd has to do with a lot of issues of inequity within the city. It actually was just annexed back in the 1990s, I believe. It was annexed very recently, and the zoning and the regulations there were much different. And when it became part of the city, developers were able to actually just build a bunch of infill housing, meaning that they could build really high apartments without having to worry if there was a sidewalk or having to worry that there was enough piping going through. And then there was a lot of problems. People did not have access to grocery stores. They have access to good schools, and they were all clumped together, even though they didn't have a way to, get to a place to find a job. Nobody had cars, so they're all living in massive poverty. And the sidewalks there have been backlogged for a long time, even though they're building, about 7 miles worth of sidewalk over in West Portland. They call that Multnomah Hills. And it's funny because if you look at the census tract, about 11% of people in Southwest Portland live in poverty. And so most people are able to get by having cars, because that's what you do in a suburb. Even if you don't have sidewalks, most people aren't using them. But in East Portland, about, I would say 30% of the census area is living under the federal poverty line. And they aren't able to afford cars, and the only way they are able to get around is either through walking or through public transit. And actually, systemically, there's massive loss of bus lines. They are cutting bus lines because a lot of what our government is doing, TriMet, who's in charge of public transportation, they're building more light rail. They're building a light rail through Southeast Portland, and as I told you before, it costs $200 million per mile. And in order to afford that, they have to cut buses, which are mostly used by people of color. And so that's pretty much what we have here when it comes to history. And I'm thinking that we can go to the Waypost now. People can use the bathroom. I can kind of just talk about how this reflects the work that I do now in the community as a young community organizer. I never really acknowledged that there was something weird going on until Occupy. When there were first people in the park, there was about 12 people of color, and within 3 weeks, it went down to just like 3. And so I asked people, I thought I saw more African Americans around here. What happened? And a lot of people said, well, we don't see race. Nothing's wrong. Why are you bringing up race? Like slavery was in the past, and you're being racist now. And that really started making me ask questions and realizing that there's a lot of history here that people don't know. And it's kind of what drove me to really look at ways that we can actually fix what's going on here. And I've actually been doing a lot of work in our capital looking at housing justice, because we actually have a Fair Housing Act, which is supposed to oblige local governments to make sure that there's equal opportunity for people to live in a good neighborhood regardless of what their income level is. And here in Oregon, we have multiple barriers. One of them is with Section 8. Anybody here know what Section 8 is? Just one person. Well, 2 people. The Fair Housing Act created Section 8 vouchers. This was a Nixon invention, and so they basically said, well, there are people who need help affording their rent. What we can do is we can make sure that the government directly subsidizes it with the landlord. And so they created vouchers where somebody could wait in line, get on a wait list, and hopefully they'll be able to get one of these vouchers that they can then turn in to help depress the amount that they have to pay for their rent. And here in Portland, we have a Section 8 voucher system, but basically there is a connotation with Section 8 voucher holders that you're going to be a welfare queen with a bunch of kids and baby daddy problems, and most people get rejected. And actually, east of 82nd, the percentage is 90% of all Section 8 vouchers are used east of 82nd. So it just shows that you just can't live in what neighborhood you would like to for your kids or anybody else. And there actually is a campaign working on removing that discrimination where landlords can't tell you can't live here because you're using Section 8. But the one that I've been working a lot on is called inclusionary zoning. And that has to do with, it's directly in relation to exclusionary laws, where those laws used to say you can't live here. Inclusionary laws are specifically saying we want this kind of person living here. And It started back in 1970s, where Montgomery County, Maryland, created an ordinance that basically said we want to make sure that a certain ratio of affordable housing units gets built with market rate units in new developments. And it's actually tied to 10% of the development is going to be market rate or affordable housing. And it's been used in over 400 different jurisdictions across the nation. And it's probably the most powerful tool that really targets areas that are high income and exclusively for people of high income, and finding a way to make sure that people who might not be able to afford that high rent can live there now. That means that their kid can go to a good school, that they can get to a bus line if they need it, that they can be able to cross the street that has a sidewalk. Because people get killed out here. There was a little girl who just died 2 weeks ago out on 136th and Powell, because she was crossing a street and there was no cars were going 35 miles an hour, and this is in the middle of a neighborhood, so it was a really dangerous place. And you don't see that around here, because you see sidewalks everywhere, cars are going very slowly. Certain neighborhoods get that special planning, other ones don't. And so inclusionary zoning is really about how we can make sure that we try to distribute affordable housing so we don't create concentrated pockets of poverty. But the issue is, back in 1999, the Home Builders Association in Oregon basically went to the legislature and said, we don't want to be forced to do stuff for poor people. We are making the money that we want to, and there's no reason that the government can tell us what to do. And so since then, we've been fighting this. We've been saying there are multiple issues, not just for low-income people or people of color. This also has to do with people who are disabled and really need good accessibility to certain neighborhoods, and we have to recognize that. And it's actually taking a lot of work. I contributed over a year of my time and resources to this. We've had the Attorney General of the state speak. We just had a rally this morning. We had about 100 people show up, and we've put a lot of energy into this. But there is really no elected leader here who really is talking about housing and fair housing. There's nobody saying we're dealing with a crisis when there's 2% vacancy within this region, and rents are just gradually growing higher and higher because we keep building max lines, we keep using urban renewal. There are like 6 different urban renewal areas, and they're massive, and it just taxes everybody. It just increases taxes to pay for one person to get benefits from the government, and everybody else has to pay for it. And so that's basically making it more expensive, and that process isn't reversing. And so we are working really hard to say, well, your arguments for the way you look at economics might be flawed, and it's not going to be sustainable much longer because this debt isn't going anywhere. And so that's kind of where I'm coming as a youth organizer, and I think by far it's so important to be doing this work because honestly, I've never had a mentor. I've never had a mentor in this work. A lot of people who are adults who might be executive directors or work for nonprofits in this area, for them it's really about protecting their power. It's good for them to have these relationships so that they always have a really good salary and that they're always able to find one issue that they might be able to push through. It's really about very long-term strategy, and when it comes to youth engagement, youth development, that's not part of the long-term strategy. And so it's been really challenging to be able to find people to learn from, and it takes a lot of watching and attention. But I would say that I've been really lucky because within the city, this is known as one of the most open and transparent cities, which is frustrating because it's still very hard for people to access their elected officials. But there's a lot of public commissions. The neighborhood associations here are very influential. We have even neighborhood coalitions, which bring these neighborhood associations together to even advocate for larger changes. And so I feel that that's also been a real reason why me as a 21-year-old who's still in college can actually testify in city council and actually start changing people's minds about different things affecting our city. But I think all in all, just looking at the fact that we're inheriting this, we are really inheriting a problem that's not getting better. has really just been my driver as to why I look at what my skills are, being able to articulate and being able to learn history and being able to just take anecdotes from people. It's just really powerful when you can see somebody and they tell you, this is what I've dealt with. And then you help them project that. You help them find a bullhorn to make sure that people understand that these problems are real. A lot of people find a way to legitimize their actions because they don't know what they're doing to the other person. So it's really important that we do work as a coalition. We find partners who come with us together. And I'm glad that I have people here also coming to support me, because that's really how you build power. You can't just do it by yourself. You really have to honor the value of the other person and realize that your success and your survival is mutually related. So I think that's all I have right now. If you guys have any questions, I hope you have questions, because I'd love to be able to see how you guys feel, if you guys have learned much from this.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
We only have about 12-15 minutes before we need to head back.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about what Right to Dream is? I've had to step out. If you already have.
Great. I'm sorry I didn't bring that up yet. So
okay.
I actually just this last summer did a 55-day hunger strike outside of City Hall. And that was actually right after I ran for mayor of Portland. And I did that for Right to Dream too. Back in 1992, you guys visited Dignity Village. You probably know some of its history. That's when it was formed. And that was thanks to City Commissioner Eric Stinn, who was actually 25 years old. So he was really young when he was elected public office. And Dignity Village started off as Camp Dignity, and they set up camp under Fremont Bridge over on the west side. That's actually kind of around where I live now. And for a while they were good. They had their own governance model. Nobody had problems with them until it was there for so long. Some people who were also living on the streets came by, and they would do drugs and they would poop on the sidewalk. And then that's when the police got in, and then it was just a cat and mouse chase throughout the rest of the city. And so Dignity Village was then allowed to set up in the middle of nowhere. Nobody cares because it's next to a correctional facility, and residents have nothing to complain about because they're out of sight, out of mind. And so the organizers who helped found Dignity Village decided that there's still a homeless crisis. There are 1,700 people sleeping on the street in Portland at any given night. There are 5,000 people who are considered to be homeless because they have shelter insecurity, they're couch surfing, they're living in their car, or they're going to be kicked out next month. And this is not getting any better with our policies. So they know that there is a huge, tightness with our funds, that we have very few options left. And they said, well, there are a lot of people who are trying to survive on the street, and it's not possible because they get beat up, they get passed by the cops. There's drug dealers around that make them relapse, and they have mental health crises, and nobody's seeing them to make sure that they are healthy and they're getting communication, they're finding services. And so they said, they found a property owner right under Chinatown Gate who said, I have this space, it's gravel right now, come, use your model, see if it can work. And they've been there, and they host about 60 people per night, and it's been there since October 9th, 2011, about the same time that Occupy Portland first started. And since then, they've helped about 13 people find jobs. About 30 people have moved there to permanent housing. There's even been 2 births that happened there. And they've used absolutely no government money. They've done it all by themselves. And they've really been able to find a way to help people who are the ones who have no resources. People who are oppressed, people who, a lot of them have, developmental disabilities, whatnot, to be champions for themselves. That's a huge problem that we have to deal with nonprofits like the Salvation Army and Goodwill, where it's always, we are handing them food, we are giving them rent money, we are giving them a doctor, but instead these people are making sure that they are meeting their own basic needs. So that's really transformative in that way. And it's hard for the city because the city's used to being needed. And so the city's actually started finding them, saying they're out of zoning procedure. And at first they were finding them $200, and they were making it double every 2 months. And after I started my hunger strike, they stopped doubling the fines, and they're only being charged $1,200 per month. But we're still just having that conversation saying, you're saying that they can't be here, but there's 1,700 people on the street every night. What are you gonna do? And then they say, well, we're trying to find money. We know you're not gonna find money. What are you gonna do? And so we're just kind of still dealing with that logical argument, and hopefully, eventually we'll get somewhere. Dignity Village is really getting a lot of good media in the press because they are a great neighbor. They sweep Chinatown, they patrol it to make sure there's no crime, and they really try to be a good steward to say, this is our home, and we're going to protect it, we're going to make it look good. And for that reason, the city is not willing to evict them from that space, even though they actually have that power to do so. So we're going to continue, cheering them on, hoping that people realize that there's, successes in community power as long as you remember to organize, feel confident in yourself, and to value your relationships, all of them.
Is there an organization important like Family Promise? Are you even familiar with the organization?
I'm not familiar with Family Promise.
They're in the process of building one in the Blue Turf, but it's successful in sending the neighborhoods around the country, including Lewiston, Idaho. Essentially, it's a network of religious institutions that their purpose is they provide temporary shelter, emergency assistance for homeless families, and provide training and assistance in finding work and finding homes. The kids go to school while they help the parents find a job and all that.
There's definitely, the great thing about the city is actually there's probably one of the highest per capita spending when it comes to human services. And we actually have a Rose City resource guide that's created by Street Roots, which is a newspaper that does houseless advocacy every year. And it catalogs all the great services. We have people like Join in East Portland, Human Solutions, Central City Concerns, Transition Project Inked, Portland Homeless Family Solutions. There's just a huge list of them. They really try hard to work together, but they're all fighting for the same money. They're all fighting for the same grants. They're all fighting to outperform each other, and it's just very inefficient. They all have their own accountant. They all have their executive director. They have their own fundraiser, and obviously that's just spreading our resources thin. And so that's kind of what we deal with here. And the other funny thing is we probably have the most churches per capita here, but then at the same time we are one of the least likely areas to have populations that go to church. So, funny place. Because we used to be really, really conservative, and everybody would go to church. And now, just very recently, a lot of young and college-educated people start moving here en masse, and it's really changed our demographic. And so that's kind of why we're that weird place that people call us weird.
Portland to New York City 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You guys have any other questions? I know it's been a long day. You guys have been working really hard. A little tired.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you so much for your time.
This was good. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm really easy to find. You can ask Robbie to for my contact info. I've also got Twitter and Facebook, and so if you want to hear what's going on in Portland, I'm always doing a bunch of community events. It's really good to stay in contact. It's really great learning opportunities for me and for everybody else.
We really appreciate you coming out here.
Thank you.
Yeah, for you guys coming out and helping support the mission. We're hearing a lot about different problems, and so this was a great kind of intro to some of the housing issues that happen in Portland. So thank you.
Cool.